One of the most influential books I read, I think it was back in the 1990s, was Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's a classic, and it's a classic for a reason. The 7 habits are really powerful things to build into your life. In a way, they're just common sense, like begin with the end in mind or put first things first. But the thing about common sense is it's not that common, is it? Well, not in practice anyway. So if you want to become more successful as a property investor or as a business person or just in life in general, I'm sure you're going to get some gems from my chat with Mark Creedon today as we unpack The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
Today, I'm looking forward to my chat with Mark Creedon about a book that's been a game changer for so many people. It's none other than Stephen Covey's classic, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Mark's the founder of Mastermind Business Accelerator and the host of the Mastermind for Business podcast. He's been my business coach for over a decade, and during that time, he's become a good friend, and he's now the CEO of the Metropole Property Group. Hi, Mark.
Hello, Michael. This is going to be fun.
Well, it is, because I remember when I first heard about this book many years ago, it really was groundbreaking, wasn't it?
Yeah, back when you and I were both a lot younger, Michael. But it was. In fact, I was just sharing with you just earlier that when the book came out, I was so looking forward to it. There'd been so much hype about it. I grabbed a copy of the book and I booked myself a B&B up in the Sunshine Coast hinterland for a weekend on my own, so I could read it and make notes and work out all of the wonderful things I was going to do as a result.
Well, this happened way back in 1989, so some people are probably even wondering, who's this guy they're talking about? Who's Stephen Covey, Mark?
Well, Michael, he was an American educator, an author, a businessman, a keynote speaker. The fascinating thing, and you'll like this, his book has sold over 25 million copies worldwide.
Yes, that's a lot of copies, but he went on to do a whole lot of other things as well, including time planners and diaries. So what he did was he studied the success habits of people and broke them down to 7 habits, which actually may all sound pretty simple once we work through them, but they actually do make a difference. And I know you've encompassed a number of them in what you do in your daily life, or I have, and I know you share that with our clients at Mastermind Business Accelerator. Now, the first one, it sounds simple, but habit number 1 of successful people, and I guess the reason we're doing this, Mark, is because if other people have achieved success, there's no reason why you can't, and why not look for a shortcut about the way they think, about the way they do things, about how they go about their lives. And the first habit was be proactive. I guess that's where it all begins, isn't it?
Well, I think it is. I mean, I guess the question, Michael, is what is being proactive? And really it's about taking responsibility for your life, isn't it? I think Covey suggested that you don't have to be reactive to your environment. It's like, when somebody annoys you and you say you just can't help being annoyed. Well, in fact, Covey would say that you can help it. By being proactive, you can control how you respond to things. And I think it's a bit like being the captain of your own ship or the master of your own fate, isn't it?
Well, I've often said you've really got to be the pilot of your life, not the passenger. You've got to be in control. So proactivity, I guess, is taking responsibility for your own reaction, for your own experiences, taking the initiative to respond positively. But we've spoken about this before, Mark, haven't we, about the concept of the internal locus of control or external locus of control?
Well, that's right. That concept, Michael, between stimulus and response, where that lies that ability to choose. So you get to choose how to react, and nothing can hurt you without your consent. And he talks a lot about that. Recognizing one's circle of influence and circle of concern. I think he talks about focusing your response and focusing on the center of your own influence as opposed to looking externally.
So successful people believe they're in control. They believe they can change their circumstances. They believe it's up to them, while the average person blames the government, the situation, the high interest rates, the bad business environment. And so the first habit of successful people, he calls be proactive, but it's a little bit more than that, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is actually being in control of your own destiny, in control of your own reactions. Basically, Michael, just be in control of your own activity and your own responses.
Now, a lot of people listening to this podcast are listening because they're interested in property. Others are interested because they're looking at success in general and in business. And this is just as relevant for you as a property investor. So don't say, oh, I've got no control because the banks are being difficult or because the government's interfering with my tenancy or the regulations are changing in front of my eyes. There are some things you can't control. What you can control is your response, isn't it?
Yeah, a matter of controlling the controllable, Michael, something we say all the time.
Okay, habit number 2 was begin with the end in mind. Now, everybody quotes that nowadays, but boy, was that a radical change in the way of thinking when Stephen Covey came up with this way back close to 50 years ago.
Yeah, it's right. Everybody does quote it now, but it was very radical. And Michael, this is about setting goals. Not just any goals, but absolutely clear, concise goals. Imagine what you want your life to be like in the end. What do you want people to say about you at your funeral?
That's morbid, isn't it?
A little bit morbid, isn't it? Now that I think about it. But that's a great exercise. But it's about living the life according to the values that are most important to you and mapping that life out. Starting your action now having in mind, where you want it to end.
Well, that's really interesting because when people come to Metropole to get involved in property investment, most of them say, they talk about their next property or the location of it, or should they buy a house or an apartment, when in fact we do the opposite. We actually go way out to the end and say, okay, what do you want life to look like down the track? What's the end game? What are you wanting to achieve? And then working backwards from that to see if the property plan we devise a property plan for them to help them achieve what they want to achieve. We bring their future into the present and so they can do something about it now. And I guess it's much the same with you when you're talking with clients at Mastermind Business Accelerator.
Oh, very, very much so. We talk about, where do you want to be? One of the conversations I always have with people is if we're having this conversation in 2 or 3 years' time, tell me, and things had worked out the way you wanted them to, what would that look like? What would be going on? What would you be doing? Where would you be living? What would your business be doing? So again, as Covey says, I think, Michael, he says it's about envisioning what you want in the future. So it's a bit like a personal mission statement in lots of ways, isn't
it? It is. So if Covey's habit number 1 is change your life to act and be proactive, habit 2 advises that you're the programmer of it. You can actually choose what you do. So I guess a lot of this has to do with action. The habit number 3, and again, nowadays, time management is very different, and I know you teach a lot about it and we discuss it at Wealth Retreat and you do it Mastermind Business Accelerator, how to make the best use of your time. But in the old days, when Covey first came up with his concept, boy, was it revolutionary. First of all, he said, put first things first. And then he came up with the quadrants, the 4 quadrants. And that was the time management standard for a decade or more.
Yeah, very much so. And in fact, after I spent the weekend reading this book, staying in this very nice little B&B, by the way, I then went into the Stephen Covey shop that opened in Sydney, and I bought all the planners and diaries and quadrant maps, and it's still true. It's not something that I would use now, but the reality is when we talk about time management, and Michael, I just recorded a podcast on this morning. But we talk about time management. We actually talk about priorities, that managing time is about managing priorities. And that's exactly, what he talked about. He talks about what's important versus what is urgent and giving things, priority in a particular order.
Well, I remember I was fascinated by his concept of the 4 quadrants, and it's hard to imagine, hey, look, I'm holding up this bit of paper in front of the microphone for all those people who are listening to the podcast so they can see the 4 quadrants. You can't really. But quadrant 1 was urgent and important deadlines. Quadrant 2, you had to work out where these new tasks fell. Quadrant 2 was not urgent and not important, areas that you can plan. Urgent but not important, and not urgent and not important. Basically what he was talking about is work out what you should be doing rather than what's important for other people, because other people's priorities suddenly become yours, even more so today than back in the old days, with the urgency of emails and texts and things like that today, Mark.
Well, I mean, I always say that your email inbox is really somebody else's priority list. if you let it. But if you look at those 4 quadrants, Michael, I think you could break it down quite easily, because what Stephen Covey said was that they fall into do, plan, delegate, or eliminate. Stuff you should do, stuff you should plan, stuff you should give to somebody else to do, and the things that are just frivolous distractions that nobody should be doing.
So I guess people really should be thinking about when a task comes up, is this important? Is it urgent? Because we tend to get distracted by things we enjoy doing, often putting the urgent and important things off, Mark.
Yep, absolutely.
So first things first was habit number 3. Habit number 4 was think win-win. Now, that was all about relationships, and that's the way that a lot of people negotiate. I guess it really depends upon how important the negotiation is, if it's a one-off or if it's a long-term relationship that you're trying to build. But he basically was suggesting you should strive for mutually beneficial relationships, because the pie of success isn't limited. Maybe you should look at how to grow a bigger pie rather than having a bigger slice of the pie.
I think, before the definitive text on negotiating, Michael, which was negotiate, influence, persuade by...
Somebody I know very well.
Yeah, exactly. This changed my thinking, because I was always taught negotiation around being very adversarial, win-lose. So, and so it became, there was a lot of posturing and a lot of, hammering home to win a point or win a negotiation. But I guess what Covey said is it's about seeking mutually beneficial solutions or agreements in relationships. And it really comes back to valuing and respecting other people. And I don't think that's changed, Michael. Maybe the process that we use has changed a bit, but I don't think those principles have changed, and probably nor should they.
No. Okay, the next habit. So we're going through Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's a book. You can get the hard copy. You may not even find hard copies nowadays, but get it on Kindle. It's definitely worth a read, because it has stood the test of time. And his next habit was seek first to understand and then to be misunderstood. Now, this is a particularly important thing, especially in the age of social media, where everyone seems to be shouting their opinions at the moment, Mark.
Yeah, what Covey says there is, it advises us to listen to others genuinely, and that by understanding their perspective, we can create an environment of empathetic communication, Michael. And of course, in turn, that will significantly increase the chances of actually being understood. I reminded myself of this not long ago. I was having a conversation with one of the directors of Metropole, and I had a particular point I wanted to get across. And in the past, I'd tried to push that point. But what I did this time was went in and said, help me to understand your situation. And through that process, once they had told me what their position was, it made it very easy for me to find a way of them seeing things my way, in a way which helped them to win through their vision. Sure.
I think in many conversations, people don't really listen. They're waiting for a break in the conversation so they can continue on with their discussion, their argument. But whether it's dealing with your loved one, your spouse, whether it's dealing with your children, whether it's dealing with business partners or clients, or in negotiation in general, it's a good rule that stood the test of time. The habit number 5, seek first to understand, then to be understood. It's a concept that I think we should all pay attention to. I know it's one of the things that you teach the members, the tribe at Mastermind Business Accelerator.
Yeah, what we say is exactly what Covey said, was using empathetic listening to genuinely understand a person's position kind of compels them to do that. So that's that law of reciprocity that you speak about. And so once you've got that, they suddenly have an open mind to being influenced by your opinion as well. And if you get that right, I think in the majority of cases you're going to end up with a win-win situation.
A moment ago, Mark, you mentioned that you just recorded a podcast on setting priorities, and that's the Mastermind for Business podcast that's now become very popular. So I'm suggesting to anyone here who's in business, considering going into business, who's looking at setting up a business or professional practice, to go to wherever you're listening to this podcast and download Mark's podcast. You accompany me once a week when I go on my Walks with Lincoln as I listen to you. And it's actually a funny sensation because we speak 3 or 4 times a day, but here you are in my ears, in my ear pods as we go for a walk. So Mastermind for Business podcast. And I guess that's similarly the name of the coaching program that we have for our clients.
Yes, Mastermind Business Accelerator. And the podcast, Michael, it's about 15 minutes. It's designed to be quick, concise, and like everything we do in Mastermind, like we do in Metropole, it's designed to give people very practical solutions that they can implement pretty quickly.
Yeah, well, Mastermind Business Accelerator is a program that some people wonder, what's all that got to do with property when Metropole's related to property? I guess we're more than property. We're helping people get the choices in life they want, and a lot of our clients are business people. You started off as my business coach, and I've had business coaches since 2006. It's, I think, one of the secrets to my business success. Interesting, you were just speaking with a couple of people earlier this week about the loneliness of running a business, and that's one of the reasons people choose to have a business coach, Mark.
Well, I think certainly with Mastermind, Michael, we find that people we always say they come for the content, but they stay for the community, because the community is a very, as you alluded to before when you referred to it as the tribe, it is a tribe of people. And the thing I love about the tribe is that we get this collective momentum and this shared wisdom. And everybody is only too happy to support each other and help each other to achieve, the results that each person is looking for.
Well, I'll leave a link in the show note. And if you'd like to share the same business coach that I do, why not have a chat and see if Mark Creedon can help you as well. As we go through the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, as written by Steve Covey in his book of that name, the 6th habit was to synergize. And that's where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Now, it's funny that we say that because that's one of the concepts of a mastermind, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it's funny, Michael, because I use the term synergy all the time. In fact, I shot an email off to somebody off this morning saying, guys, I want to introduce each to each other because I think there's some synergy there. But that concept of combining the strengths of people through positive teamwork, I think achieves goals that no one else could have done. And that's certainly the theory behind Stephen Covey's 6th habit.
Okay. The other one is one that's, the last habit's been one that's been quoted a lot too. Actually, when you look at this, boy, was this life-changing at the time, but nowadays everyone's quoting it in their own way. And that's the concept of sharpening your saw, the habit of self-renewal. Covey believed that to be effective, you've got to devote time to renewing yourself physically, mentally, spiritually, socially. You've got to spend time sharpening your saw before you start chopping down the tree.
Well, that's right. If I had $1 for every time I've said this to somebody and repeated Covey's advice on this, Michael. But I think what he talks about is that you've got to seek balance, and you've got to renew your resources and your energy, which is your physical health, your mental health, your mindset, in order to sort of create a sustainable, long-term, effective lifestyle. So, he primarily emphasized exercise for physical renewal, and he spoke about some spiritual renewal as well. But I think it applies every bit as much to your mental well-being and your mental health as well.
Very much so. Now, they're the 7 habits of highly effective people, as quoted by Stephen Covey. But he died back in 2012. He was going around the world giving seminars. But I came across something he wrote in his final years that it struck me as interesting. So let me just read it to you, Mark. He said, "When I look back at my life nowadays, which I sometimes do," this is Covey saying this, "what strikes me most forcibly about it is what seemed at the time to be most significant and seductive seems now most futile and absurd." He went on to say, for instance, success in all of its various guises, being known and being praised, ostensible pleasures like acquiring money or seducing women or traveling or going to and from around the world. He said, all that in retrospect seems pure fantasy, what Pascal calls licking the earth. In other words, what seemed important at the time isn't. Your priorities shift, Mark, as your circumstances change. So when you're poor and homeless, of course, you're looking for very, very different things than when you've got a nice roof above your head and you've got a lot of money in your bank account.
Yeah, it's interesting, Michael, because wealth in and of itself isn't satisfying or not for long. And I guess it's one of the things we talk about both in property and in business, and also at Wealth Retreat. I mean, there's that old saying, it's, being wealthy doesn't make you happy, but I'd rather cry on the back of your Bentley than. but the reality is, I think your priorities change. And the other thing I think is that the more that you think about these things and you more think about, I always close all of my sessions, Michael, with whatever you do, please make sure you spend time with those who matter most. And for me, it's about going, what is really important? Making money's great. And it doesn't have to be one or the other. That gets back to it being a limitless pie that you said before. But if your only focus is on making money and the only solution to all of your issues is more wealth and then more wealth, then I think that's a mistake.
Sure, because you've really got to enjoy the journey. So you've got to recognize when enough is enough. So I guess if we look back at this Stephen Covey 7 Habits, they're more than just a to-do list. He actually, I think, had a different idea behind them. They're a roadmap to becoming principled, to becoming centered, to being effective as a human. Actually, ethics. He brought ethics into it at a time when greed was good. There was that
Gordon
Gekko time where everyone was greedy and stomping over other people. He was a very innovative forward thinker, Stephen Covey.
Yeah, he was. I guess the thing, Michael, that we've got to be careful of here is that it's very easy to, and the mistake that I made when I first read this book impacted me more probably 5 years on from reading it than it did when I first read it. Because when I first read it, I did kind of see it as a to-do list, and if I could just follow this and I could just tick and flick these things as I went, then everything would work out, beautifully fine for me. And it's not the case. It's much easier said than done. However, like any change, takes time and effort. But the good thing is just making a start. I mean, listening to this podcast and making note of maybe picking one of those habits and thinking, how can I improve myself just that little bit? It's like that little 1%, that incremental improvement, and it will develop over time.
Sure. So quickly going through them, habit number 1 was be proactive, be the pilot of your life, not just the passenger. Habit number 2 is begin with the end in mind. Set goals so that you get to where you want to. If you don't have goals, if you don't have plans, you're going to be part of somebody else's goals and somebody else's plans. So that doesn't make a lot of sense. Put first things first was habit number 3, which is really understanding priorities, your priorities, not other people's priorities. Habit number 4 was think win-win. And this was more than just a negotiation, as we said a moment ago. It was about relationships and about dealing with people with respect. Habit number 5 was seek first to understand and then be understood. In other words, how are you going to help people? How are you going to negotiate? How are you going to persuade if you don't understand what the other person wants to achieve? Synergize was habit number 6, which is the concept that teamwork makes the dream work. You can't do it on your own. And habit number 7 was the really important one of taking time out for renewal, physical, spiritual, mental, and social as well. So lots to take in there, Mark. Thanks for your time and look forward to our regular monthly podcasts.
Yeah, these are always good fun. I'm looking forward to it, Michael.
Thanks, Mark. Bye. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Mark Creedon about the 7 habits of highly effective people. Now, in this podcast, we normally talk about property, about money, but you often spend time talking about success because they're all interrelated, aren't they? And if you got some benefit from my chat with Mark and you don't currently subscribe to this podcast, just stop for a sec before we get on to the next section, which is my mindset message, and just stop and click on wherever it shows on your podcast player to follow or subscribe to this podcast. So twice a week, you're going to end up getting hints, tips, tricks from my guests and myself. Now, as we spoke about Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, many of them still relate to property investment, like begin with the end in mind. As I said when I was chatting with Mark, that's how we help our clients at Metropole. We're much more than just an ordinary buyer's agent. What we do is give our clients strategic property advice, and similarly, we begin with the end in mind. We work out where they want to get to, what their timeframes are, where they want to stop along the way, because there's multiple paths to the end goal for most of our clients. Some are in a hurry. Some actually want to stop along the way and have a holiday overseas, or stop, can't earn income for a while and have a baby. So when we make the plans, when we write strategic property plans, they're very different for everybody. There's not one size fits all, just like not all property are good investments or the right investment for particular people. It depends what part of your investment journey you're on. So rather than just buying any property and then wondering why it's not working, if you're serious about taking advantage of this new stage of the property cycle, have a chat with my team at Metropole. Go to metropole.com.au and have an initial free, obligation-free clarity consultation to understand what your options are and see how we can help you plan to become the person you plan to become, and then we'll help you implement that plan through our property advisory, through property management, through buyer's agency, wealth advisory, through our renovations or development, our range of services. Metropole.com.au.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
Is fear holding you back in your career? Maybe it's in your relationships. Could be in your investment journey. Or maybe fear is stopping you achieving your dreams. Now, if this is the case, you're in good company. So I'd like to have a little chat with you in this mindset session about the common fears that hold people back. But before I start, I guess I should say you've probably had lots of people give you advice on getting past your fears, suggest that if you can break the shackles of fear, you're going to be unstoppable. Now, that's all well and good. It is important to master your fears in order to feel free, and you've got to master your fears to get things done. But I also want to tell you that a world without fear would be simultaneously more dangerous, less rewarding. I don't know, just plain flat. So given that we've spent so much time wishing that our fears would go away, so that we can get on with things, let's first of all have a quick look at why you may actually want to cultivate fear as a friend, not as an enemy. You see, fear is a great guide to opportunity. Think about it. Fear often shows you what's important, what matters to you. And if you didn't have fear to guide you, maybe you wouldn't know what's important. So maybe fear isn't that bad after all. And of course, fear motivates us into action. The way I see it, way back years ago, our ancestors who didn't run away in fear when they saw a saber-toothed tiger running at them simply just didn't survive to reproduce. So fear does call action into being, doesn't it? Now, most of us don't face serious physical threats from hungry tigers every day, but we do face them from, crazy bosses, angry clients, the fear of public speaking. Now, that's very common, isn't it? Now, in those cases, our fear is still motivating us to do something, to enhance our chances of survival. The trick is to be able to transcend our primitive lizard brain and do something useful. Running away or throwing a spear may work on tigers. It doesn't actually work too well on your bus, does it? So what I'm trying to say is fear does have some uses because it actually lets you know that you're alive. That's why we like roller coasters. Anyway, I do, because they scare us, mostly in a safe way. Same with suspense movies and thrillers. So, yes, you do have to have some fear in life. But let's go through 9 of the common fears that could be holding you back from achieving what you deserve in life. And the first one I'd like to discuss is the fear of rejection, because many people avoid entering relationships or try to meet new people due to the fear of rejection. Whether you've got a fear of your boss declining a request for you to get a raise, or a fear that that attractive person won't go out on a date with you, don't let the fear of rejection hold you back. Do it anyway. Of course, a big fear is the fear of failure. One of the top fears in the world is the fear of failure. Many people just won't try anything unless they're confident they can win. Failure is a normal part of our life. You've heard me say it over and over again in these sessions that I'm a real success at failing. I've just gotten up one more time because failure will similarly help you find your eventual success. People are also scared of uncertainty. They've got the fear of uncertainty and it prevents them from trying something different. They sometimes think, what if I wouldn't like it? This fear can prevent you from trying new things or doing things in a different way than you've always done them. As you see, I'm working through the common fears to see which of those may be affecting you and holding you back? If you talk about relationships, it's sometimes the fear of loneliness. Sometimes people stay in bad relationships or resist living alone because of their fear of loneliness. Learning how to tolerate feeling lonely and finding ways to keep yourself company could help you manage to get over loneliness. Of course, the big one's the fear of change. We don't like change, but in this rapidly changing world, it's something you've got to get used to. Many people resist change. Fear of change causes some people to become stagnant, and they miss out on a lot of the really great opportunities in life. Now, a big one's the fear of being judged. People worry that other people will think negatively of them, so they shy away from social opportunities or chances to advance their career. Now, people who adopt this fear, the fear of being judged, they often exaggerate how other people are going to perceive them. They think people are going to think negatively of them, talk behind their back, and they often underestimate their ability to tolerate not being well received by others. Let me put it this way. What other people think of you is none of your business. Clearly, another fear is the fear of something bad happening. Bad things happen to us all the time, though. It's inevitable. However, when people constantly fear something bad's going to happen, it often restricts their activities. They may avoid doing lots of things that they should be doing, or going to certain places, or taking on investments. Don't be scared of bad things happening. Do your homework, do your research, get on with it. Of course, another fear is the fear of getting hurt. None of us like getting hurt. I mean, if you didn't mind getting hurt, you wouldn't look both sides before you cross the road. However, a big fear of being emotionally hurt often stops people getting into the right sort of relationships or avoiding friendships or keeping family at arm's length. So think about what you're missing out on. Think about how realistic your fears are. But the big fear I come across with business people, entrepreneurs and investors, still see it with the very, very successful investors we spend time with every year at Wealth Retreat, is the fear of inadequacy. It's a fear that all people seem to share, that feeling that we're just not good enough. And that allows us to pass up opportunities or decline the opportunity to go ahead and do things because you think you're inadequate or you don't deserve it. Often people overcompensate for their fears by trying to be a perfectionist. Perfectionism is really a fear of not getting it right, and then they get plagued by the thoughts that they just won't measure up to other people. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is fear is normal. Use fear to motivate you, to move you forward, to remain alive. Use fear as a guide towards what's important for you. And as I said, to motivate you to take action, to improve your odds, to give you a chance to get ahead. Don't let fear hold you back. Well, thanks for spending the last little while with me, and I hope you got some benefit from this show. If you did, and you know somebody else who'd also benefit, please tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. There's a share button on every podcast app. On Apple Podcasts, there's 3 little buttons down the bottom. Press it and share it, or just tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you'll definitely be doing me a favour and helping me in my quest to make as many people as possible financially literate. Now, there's ways of catching up with me between these shows. Just look for Michael Yardney on social media, or why not join my private Facebook group? Go to Facebook and look for the Property Update Facebook group. And I have a way of saying thank you to you for subscribing to this podcast. Go to podcastbonus.com.au. There'll be a link in the show notes, podcastbonus.com.au, where you can get a bunch of ebooks and reports. My way of saying thank you. And when you've got time, why not listen to some of the old podcasts? There's individual lessons in each of those that I think would be helpful for you. I'll be back again real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favorite Android app as the Michael Yardney Podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael, but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?